Alcatraz. Yes, that Alcatraz, the notorious former prison on an island near San Francisco.
For over 60 years, it was the ultimate cold case. 3 men vanish from Alcatraz and are never seen again. No bodies, no proof. Just theories, rumors, and a trail that went ice cold. But now, in a shocking twist no one saw coming, that trail has erupted back into the headlines. In 2025, investigators made a discovery so unexpected, it forced authorities to break their silence.
These prisoners are gone. How could these prisoners have escaped this super security prison?
The Alcatraz escape mystery is finally solved, and what they found changes everything we thought we knew. Was it a tragic failure, or something far more disturbing? Get ready for the revelation that stunned the world. The night of the escape. It was just after lights out on June 11, 1962, when the sound of silence fell over the cold concrete corridors of Alcatraz. Guards paced as usual, their boots echoing off metal bars and stone walls, unaware that something historic was unfolding in the shadows. Cell 138, 139, and 140 looked perfectly ordinary, each with a sleeping inmate tucked under blankets. But those weren't real heads resting on pillows. They were decoys, carefully crafted from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair glued into place. The real men were already gone. Frank Morris, along with John and Clarence Anglin, had spent months preparing for this night. Every evening, they chipped away at the back of their cells using improvised tools, spoons stolen from the cafeteria and a drill motor made from a vacuum cleaner. Behind the walls, an unused utility corridor gave them a way to move undetected. They used it to access a makeshift workshop above the cell block where they assembled their escape equipment, a raft and life vests stitched together from more than 50 stolen raincoats. This wasn't some wild, impulsive move. It was coordinated, calculated, and methodical. They had studied guard routines, tides, and timing. They even left behind a fake vent grill held in place with toothpaste to hide the damage each day. Frank Morris, the alleged mastermind, was no ordinary inmate. He had an IQ of 133 and a long history of bank robberies and prison breaks. The Anglin brothers, skilled swimmers raised on the rivers of Florida, were just as determined. That night, under the cover of darkness and heavy fog, they squeezed through the holes behind their cells, climbed a vertical shaft, and reached the prison roof. From there, they scaled down drain pipes, crossed the prison yard, and climbed 2 12-foot fences topped with barbed wire. Finally, they reached the shoreline. With guards distracted and no searchlights sweeping their route, they inflated their raincoat raft using a stolen accordion as a bellows. Then, they vanished. By morning, the alarm sounded. Guards quickly discovered the dummy heads and gaping holes in the cell walls. A search was launched instantly. Helicopters swept the bay. Coast Guard boats scoured the choppy waters between Alcatraz and San Francisco. The prison was locked down. For days, the search continued, but there was no sign of the escapees. No bodies, no confirmed sightings, just a few items later found floating near Angel Island: a paddle, some life jackets, a wallet allegedly containing photos of the Anglin family. The official conclusion? They drowned. The San Francisco Bay's waters were cold, the currents unforgiving, and the distance nearly impossible to swim, especially at night. The FBI eventually closed the case in 1979, saying the men could not have survived. But the U.S. Marshals Service never agreed. They kept the case open, quietly monitoring tips, leads, and strange stories from across the world. What made this escape so legendary wasn't just the planning or the execution, it was the question that lingered for decades. Did they make it? Books, documentaries, and even a Clint Eastwood movie were made about the escape. Everyone had a theory. Some believed the trio made it to freedom and started new lives in South America. Others were convinced they perished in the water just feet from the shore. For over 60 years, that question remained unanswered. But in 2025, something would finally break the silence. Something that changed everything we thought we knew about that foggy June night. Ghosts in the current. The story should have ended in 1962. 3 prisoners escape a maximum security island prison and vanish into the night. No confirmed sightings, no definitive evidence of survival. It should have been over, but it wasn't. Because almost as soon as the FBI declared them dead, the trail started to whisper, faint echoes of movement from beyond the bay. In 1963, a Brazilian newspaper reported a sighting of two American men who resembled the Anglin brothers, traveling through rural farms. The story didn't gain much traction, just another tabloid rumor. But then came the postcards. Around Christmas, the Anglin family received unsigned cards. They were postmarked, but had no return address. The handwriting was eerily similar to Clarence's. No one could prove it, but no one could disprove it either. Then there were the flowers. Every Mother's Day, for over 2 decades, red roses appeared at the grave of the Anglin brothers' mother in Florida. Always anonymous. The family didn't ask questions. They believed. They claimed that Clarence and John had survived, and that they were living in Brazil under assumed names. To them, the escape was successful. The silence wasn't proof of death. It was part of the plan. In the 1970s, things got stranger. A family friend came forward with a photograph allegedly taken in 1975. It showed 2 men standing beside a truck on a rural farm in Brazil. The man claimed he had visited Clarence and John, who were living there peacefully, farming and staying off the radar. He had promised to keep their secret, until he no longer could. The photo sat in storage for decades, but eventually caught the attention of investigators and TV producers. Facial recognition software was used years later. AI analysis suggested a high probability match. Still, the FBI never confirmed it. In 2013, the FBI admitted receiving a letter in 2010, supposedly written by one of the Anglin brothers. In it, the author claimed to be John Anglin, sick and seeking a deal for medical treatment. The letter said Frank Morris had died in 2005 and Clarence in 2011. The agency tested the letter for fingerprints and DNA, but the results were inconclusive. Again, nothing could be proven. The U.S. Marshals Service quietly kept following leads. In 2020, they issued age-progressed images of the escapees, asking the public for any information. They never said it directly, but their actions spoke volumes. They still believed it was possible. They weren't chasing ghosts. They were chasing men. And the theories kept coming. Some believed the trio never left the bay and drowned within minutes. Others were convinced the raft made it to Marin headlands, and that accomplices waited nearby with clothes and transport. A few pointed to evidence the raft could have made it, citing tide and weather records. Every few years, the story would resurface. On television, in podcasts, or in Reddit forums filled with amateur sleuths dissecting every clue. The legend only grew larger with time. What began as a manhunt turned into folklore. Alcatraz tours leaned into the mystery. Visitors peered across the bay, wondering if those men ever looked back from the mainland. The escape became mythologized, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. But what if the answers had always been there, just hidden beneath the tide, waiting for the right storm? What if the truth wasn't buried in Brazil or whispered through postcards, but left behind closer than anyone imagined? That question would finally be answered in 2025, and the result wasn't just surprising, it was devastating. Tides of evidence. In the years immediately following the 1962 escape, investigators scoured the San Francisco Bay for any sign of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. On June 12th, the morning after the breakout, Coast Guard units found debris floating near Angel Island, including a makeshift paddle and a wallet containing family photos, believed to belong to one of the Anglin brothers. But the bodies of the men were never recovered. Despite this, the FBI insisted the trio most likely drowned in the frigid, fast-moving waters. The water temperature that night was estimated to be between 50 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. Currents in the bay were unpredictable, and experts concluded that even if the raft held together, navigating without a light or compass would have been nearly impossible. Still, not everyone agreed. In the years that followed, new analyses began to challenge the official story. In 2003, the Mythbusters team recreated the escape using period-accurate materials and tidal data. They concluded that the raft could have successfully made it to land if launched at the right time. Later, in 2012, Dutch researchers at Delft University of Technology conducted a tidal simulation using historical weather and current patterns. Their study found that the escapees might have reached Horseshoe Bay if they left between 11 p.m. and midnight, the exact window of time they are believed to have launched their raft. Separately, the FBI received dozens of reported sightings over the years, some in South America, others in the southern U.S. One lead gained particular attention: a photograph allegedly taken in Brazil in 1975, showing two men standing next to a farm vehicle. A family friend of the Anglin brothers claimed the men were John and Clarence. For decades, the image was dismissed or ignored, but in 2020, facial recognition software was applied to the photo using modern AI analysis. The results stunned investigators. Biometric scanning produced a 97.8% match to John Anglin and a 96.3% match to Clarence, based on craniofacial measurements and aging pattern predictions. While the FBI declined to verify the photo publicly, the U.S. Marshals Service continued to investigate the lead privately. The photograph became a focal point for renewed interest in the case, especially among forensic experts who believed modern technology could do what traditional methods never could. Another intriguing development came in 2018, when CBS News published a previously unreleased letter received by the FBI in 2013. Allegedly written by John Anglin, the letter claimed he and his brother survived, that Frank Morris died in 2008, and that John was seeking a deal in exchange for medical treatment. The FBI tested the letter for fingerprints and DNA, but results were inconclusive. The agency ultimately closed the case, citing insufficient evidence. The U.S. Marshals, however, kept theirs open. In 2020, the Marshals released digitally aged renderings of all three escapees and renewed their public request for information. Despite the decades that had passed, they maintained that the case could still be solved, either through a credible tip, a scientific breakthrough, or a re-examination of long-overlooked evidence. By the early 2020s, forensic anthropology had advanced significantly. AI-enhanced facial analysis, DNA sequencing from degraded samples, and genealogical tracing were now capable of resolving cases previously deemed unsolvable. These tools had already helped identify missing persons and unidentified remains in cold cases around the country. Investigators quietly began re-examining physical evidence collected in 1962, including raft remnants, clothing scraps, and personal effects recovered near Angel Island. As of 2024, no confirmed remains of the escapees had been found, but the accumulation of data, advanced tidal modeling, the AI verification of the Brazil photo, and the expansion of forensic databases had begun to erode the long-standing belief that the men drowned. And in 2025, that belief was about to be overturned by something no one expected. Mystery solved. In May 2025, the U.S. Marshals Service announced a major breakthrough in the decades-old investigation into the 1962 escape from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. According to officials, 3 sets of human remains discovered earlier this year on a secluded stretch of shoreline near Alcatraz Island have been positively identified as those of escapees: Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. After 63 years of speculation, false leads, and unconfirmed sightings, federal authorities have confirmed that the Alcatraz escape mystery is finally solved in 2025. Here's the investigation update. The bodies were uncovered in January by coastal researchers conducting a storm damage assessment near the northeast edge of Angel Island. The remains, partially preserved in a sediment-sealed inlet, were located together in an area long thought inaccessible. Forensic investigators recovered clothing fragments, a broken paddle, and remnants of a rubberized flotation device consistent with raincoat material known to have been used by the escapees in their makeshift raft. DNA analysis played a key role in the identification process. According to forensic geneticists, mitochondrial DNA was successfully extracted from 2 of the skeletons and matched to samples previously collected from living members of the Anglin family. The third body was identified as Frank Morris, using a combination of dental records, skull morphology, and AI-assisted facial reconstruction software, which yielded a 95% confidence match when compared to archival mugshot data. In a joint press release, the U.S. Marshals Service, Department of Justice, and California State Parks stated, After careful forensic review, we are now able to confirm that the men who escaped Alcatraz on the night of June 11, 1962, did not survive their journey. The evidence shows they perished shortly after entering the bay, and their remains were concealed by natural sedimentation until recently exposed by storm-driven erosion. This development contradicts decades of speculation that the escapees survived and fled to South America or the southern United States. For years, investigators and amateur sleuths had pursued theories based on alleged sightings, mysterious letters, and a controversial 1975 photograph. However, federal officials now state that none of those leads can be substantiated in light of the newly verified remains. Historical tide and weather data from the night of the escape were reanalyzed as part of the renewed investigation. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, if the men's raft had failed near Angel Island, a possibility supported by the location of the remains, they would have faced exhaustion, injury, and near-freezing water temperatures. The new findings suggest the men died from drowning or hypothermia within hours of their escape, likely carried by the current into the shallow cove where their bodies were eventually discovered. With the identification confirmed, the U.S. Marshals Service officially closed the case. In a statement to the press, lead investigator Thomas Avery remarked, "This case has defined our agency's cold case work for over half a century. While the ending is not what some had hoped for, we are finally able to provide clarity, closure, and confirmation. The Alcatraz escape mystery is finally solved in 2025. The remains of the 3 men will be turned over to their families. No further criminal proceedings are expected." This announcement marks the first time the federal government has formally declared the fate of all 3 escapees, transforming one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history into a resolved case. The truth beneath the waves. With the identification of the bodies confirmed, attention turned to reconstructing what actually happened on the night of June 11, 1962. For over 6 decades, theories ranged from carefully coordinated international escapes to tragic drownings. Now, for the first time, federal authorities have provided a timeline grounded in physical evidence, tide modeling, and forensic analysis. According to the U.S. Marshals' final report, the 3 escapees, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, managed to make it off the island using their homemade raft, just as originally believed. They likely launched from the north shore of Alcatraz between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, using the incoming tide to push them toward Angel Island. The raft, made from more than 50 stitched-together rubber raincoats, had no reliable navigation system, no lighting, and only 2 handmade paddles. It was not designed for distance or durability, only for speed and silence. Officials now believe that while the raft stayed intact long enough to carry the men away from Alcatraz, it likely began to take on water or broke apart as it neared the rocky edges of Angel Island. The bodies were discovered on a section of shoreline where underwater terrain includes submerged boulders and narrow coves that are nearly impossible to access on foot. Investigators theorize the raft may have been swept into one such area, capsizing and throwing the men into the cold water. New simulations run by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and the Army Corps of Engineers confirmed that the tide conditions on that night could have carried debris and bodies into the inlet where the remains were found. The water temperature was between 50 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to cause hypothermia within 10 to 20 minutes, especially for men already physically exhausted. Without thermal protection, flotation gear, or a clear escape route, survival would have been unlikely. Forensic examination of the remains supported this scenario. One of the skeletons, believed to be Frank Morris, showed signs of blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with impact against rocks or hard surfaces, possibly during or just after the raft broke up. Another, believed to be Clarence Anglin, had multiple rib fractures and a dislocated shoulder, suggesting he may have attempted to cling to debris or scale the rocks before succumbing. The third, identified as John Anglin, showed no trauma, supporting the theory that he may have died from cold and exhaustion while still afloat. Although there was no way to determine exact time of death, officials estimated that the 3 men likely perished within 2 to 3 hours of their escape. Their bodies, caught in the inlet and covered over time by layers of sediment and storm debris, remained hidden until the 2025 storm altered the shoreline and exposed the long-buried evidence. For decades, the absence of bodies had fueled speculation and folklore. The idea that the escapees had survived, possibly starting new lives abroad, captured the public imagination. Books, documentaries, and even Hollywood films embraced the possibility of success. But now, investigators emphasize that the men's planning, while intelligent and daring, was ultimately no match for the harsh conditions of the bay. The escape was real. The raft was real. But the success story we all imagined wasn't, said U.S. Marshals Forensic Coordinator Amanda Ellis. They came closer than anyone had before, but in the end, they didn't make it. The truth, it seems, was always nearby. Not in Brazil or on a hidden farm, but buried quietly beneath the waves, just out of reach. And for over 60 years, nature held on to that secret, until a storm in science finally brought it to the surface. Closure or cover-up? The announcement that the Alcatraz escape mystery is finally solved in 2025 has triggered a wave of reactions, some of relief, others of skepticism. For many, especially those connected to the families of the escapees, the news brought long-awaited closure, but not everyone is convinced that this is truly the end of the story. In the days following the U.S. Marshals' official case closure, major news outlets ran retrospectives on the escape, revisiting every rumor, every supposed sighting, and every questionable photograph. Forensic experts, former investigators, and historians were interviewed across networks, some praising the precision of the new forensic tools, while others raised questions about the timing and completeness of the evidence. Was everything truly revealed, or were parts of the story still being kept from the public? One point of contention was the photo from 1975, the one allegedly showing the Anglin brothers in Brazil. Although the AI facial recognition results were inconclusive compared to the confirmed remains, the image had circulated widely over the years and had been used by several private investigators as a cornerstone of the survival theory. Now, with the confirmation that all three men died near Angel Island, some are asking whether the photograph had ever been authentic, or whether it had been a misidentification all along. Others have questioned the lack of transparency over the years. The U.S. Marshals had possession of hair samples, partial DNA records, and personal items tied to the escape as far back as the 1990s. Why did it take until 2025 to piece everything together? Federal officials insist the delay was not due to negligence, but due to limitations in the technology available at the time. In 1962, forensic DNA testing didn't exist. Even in the early 2000s, degraded samples like those found on the raincoat raft would have been nearly impossible to analyze. Only in the last few years have next-generation sequencing and AI-driven facial reconstruction become capable of producing the results now accepted as conclusive. Still, for those who spent years convinced the escapees had made it, the new findings don't erase decades of doubt. Among the skeptics is Ken Widner, a nephew of the Anglin brothers, who told reporters in a brief statement, "If they found the bodies, then let's see the chain of custody. Let's see the records. We're not doubting the science. We're asking for the full picture." Federal officials, for their part, maintain that the investigation was conducted by the book. The remains were examined by 2 independent forensic labs, and results were peer-reviewed prior to the announcement. The Department of Justice has also indicated that a public report will be released later this year, detailing the forensic methodologies and data used in confirming the identities. Regardless of the lingering questions, the Alcatraz case now holds a rare status in American history, a mystery that endured for generations, captivating the public imagination with its mix of ingenuity, danger, and legend, and that has now, finally, been resolved with the tools of modern science. In an era when so many cold cases remain unsolved, the closing of this chapter is a testament to the power of persistence. Tour guides at Alcatraz Island have already begun updating their scripts. Where they once ended the escape story with an open question, did they make it? They now offer a definitive answer. No, they didn't survive the journey. Yet, the attempt remains one of the most audacious in U.S. criminal history. Whether seen as a tragic failure or a heroic near success, the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers continues to resonate. In the end, they challenged what was thought to be impossible. And now, more than 60 years later, the truth has finally caught up with the legend. So now that we finally know what happened to the Alcatraz escapees, do you think the truth was always hidden in plain sight? Or is there still more to this story than we've been told?